Change is afoot in Great Britain, and the people there are impatient to see results. Our guests today, Kathryn Sturrock and Jonathan Moakes, fixtures in political strategy and messaging there, join us from this week's historic Labour Party conference, one that's devoted to driving the change people want. But just how long do they have to show it? From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., a special international edition of 13th and Park.
We give you information, not a panic attack.
I mean, look what's going on. I mean, my God.
This was it. My kids were gonna die.
That time is gone forever.
This is the biggest story in America.
We weren't prepared for this.
Don't you want to speak truth to power?
Toughest thing I ever had to do.
Well, Kathryn and Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us from Great Britain. Kathryn, what did conservatives do wrong that led them into such disfavor in the election from a couple months ago? I mean, it was a resounding thumping by the Labour Party. What was it they weren't doing right? And what did Labour do to really kind of justify that result?
Well, I think there's a lot of things. And look, when any party's been in government for 14 years, inevitably, the challenges are going to start to stack up over time. But I think in recent years, obviously, we've seen a lot of different prime ministers, a lot of changes, a lot of chaos within the party that the public has become quite frustrated and disillusioned with. I mean, there are two landmark moments, I think, in the public's mind. And the first is the government under Boris Johnson and their sort of not sticking to the rules that they imposed during the COVID pandemic. That was a big moment where their favourability ratings dropped and they never really recovered. And then the second was when Liz Truss was Prime Minister, the budget and the impact that had on markets. And again, their favourability ratings fell. And though they changed leader, Rishi Sunak was not able to sort of boost them in the polls at all. Meanwhile, Labour has been seen to have a steady pair of hands in Keir Starmer. His big play has been he's changed the party and now he's going to change the country. And so they've been able to sort of fill that desire that we've had for stability and certainty in the country. And they've done that quite effectively.
So, Jonathan, they've already said that they want a 10-year mandate. They want a chance to really put into play everything that has to happen to really have fundamental change. How quickly do they really need to start showing something before people become impatient all over again?
Yeah, I think that's such a critical question. I mean, Labour won by British standards a fairly hefty majority. I think it's about 174-seat majority in Parliament, but they did so on a 34% share of the national vote. And obviously that's very unique to Britain's electoral system, which is first past the post in terms of being focused on constituencies rather than the national vote. And if you sort of dig into the numbers quite a bit, the majority, although thumping in terms of seats, is quite narrow and shallow in terms of votes. So they've got a lot of work to do in terms of shoring up that majority to guarantee that they win in the next general election and get that time. And I think both Kathryn and I observed at conference that there was a large amount of, I suppose, what you would term steely resolve on the job that they have to do, and the fact that they're going to have to take some unpopular decisions for long-term gain. But that's going to be tricky in terms of when you're trying to actually win a bit more electoral support. And in Britain, I suppose we don't have the kind of midterm elections that the Americans have in between presidential elections, but we are approaching local elections for councils in next May. And then in 2026, there's regional elections in Scotland and Wales. So Labour will have very, very much their sort of sights set on those to build momentum. But if they're not able to show some delivery and make people feel some delivery, it's going to be difficult for them to be able to then build up the momentum to get into 2029. So I think the sort of short answer to your question is it's not given by any stretch of the imagination that Labour can actually get a 10-year mandate. It's going to be highly competitive. The Reform Party vote, they got 4 million votes and were second to Labour in many seats. That's something to be reckoned with. And then on the youth side of the vote, and given the sort of new Green agenda, there's the Green Party, which we saw in places like Bristol, close to where Kathryn lives. They're a threat on the kind of progressive or left side of the party.
One of the weaknesses, it seems, that Labour has currently, just judging by some of the recent polling, are among the working class, which should be the absolute hard rock base of Labour, and even younger voters, as Jonathan was talking about the Green Party's attraction and other things. How does Labour try to solidify those two constituencies, which probably are very, very critical to its future success and its future support.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And look, one of Labour's manifesto pledges was to give the vote to 16-year-olds. So if it doesn't now make a play for those votes, actually what the data is showing right now, that a lot of that age demographic are increasingly likely to either go to Green on the left or to go to Reform on the right. They're less interested in the parties of the centre. I don't think Labour has yet really set out its stall properly and convincingly for youth, but I think we did pick up a few things at conference. They were talking about a youth guarantee. They're talking about young people either being earning or learning. Sure Start, which is a program they introduced under New Labour under Blair, but doing a sort of a teenage version of that. That was a very popular thing that the Blair government did. So I think they're starting to roll out, particularly that appeal to youth. In terms of the Brexit voters, there's still a huge unanswered question there. And I think that was something we saw in every panel we went to almost. They were grappling with that still.
So, Jonathan, one of the other things that's come out is there is a lack of trust. I don't want to say distrust, but a lack of trust currently for Labour Party leadership. Where does that come from? Is that just a general kind of unrest that people are kind of fed up with government right now from all directions and they're waiting for someone to kind of step forward and prove it?
Yeah, I think Britain is by no means immune from the sort of general levels of cynicism and distrust in politics that we're seeing globally.
Oh, yeah.
But particularly, Labour in many respects did benefit in this election, as Kathryn was saying earlier on, from a very, very poor record of the Tories and from some actions in the Tory government that obviously built up residual distrust. And I think the bar to sort of politicians breaking trust or people going, oh, you politicians are all the same, is very, very low. The lead up to this party conference has been quite difficult for Labour and for Keir Starmer in particular, because there've been a lot of stories about donations and gifts that he received on the campaign trail, clothes for himself and his wife, free tickets to watch Arsenal football stadium this afternoon. As we record, there's an issue about him getting a donation of a flat so his son could study. All those kinds of instances, although he's technically done nothing wrong, it just builds up sort of perception in the government and in the new government that they're just the same as the Tories. The difficult decisions that I referenced earlier, one of the really challenging decisions that Labour has had to make because of the state of public finances is cut what are called winter fuel payments that certain pensioners get for their heating. And the moment that sort of politicians do that, coupled with them seeing, oh, here's Keir Starmer sitting in a corporate box at the Arsenal football game while cutting fuel payments for pensioners, it just breaks that bar, shatters it, and people go, you're just the same. And then it sort of plummets directly, which really goes back to, I think, what Labour really need to do is probably communicate a lot more effectively and emotively at what they're sort of trying to do, rather than being probably a bit technocratic and focused, but also need to show some sort of quick wins that make people feel, okay, these people are different.
Well, what you just talked about, the pressures on pensioners, one of the reasons, Kathryn, right, that current support among older voters is not very good for Labour. I mean, I saw a number like 70 to 80% are really just not sold on this. Does Labour really have to, first of all, be square about where they're starting from? It's not like, hey, we're going to wave a magic wand and everything's going to change overnight. Set the narrative properly and fairly so they have a shot to actually succeed, as opposed to fallen expectations before they get even out of the starting gate.
Yeah, I think that's been really front of mind. And I think there's been a clear effort to manage expectations, almost in an opposite way to the politics of the past. I think now maybe there is some recognition that they may have gone too far in doing that. And actually the pessimism that they've started to spread may become self-fulfilling in some way, to kind of talking down Britain, the economy, what we can hope to achieve or where we can hope to be in 5 years' time. So I think that is a problem. But look, this was a difficult conference for them also, because I don't think they expected to necessarily be in government at this conference. A lot of people expected the election to be not so far from the US election in the latter part of this year. And so what you have is them going into conference without the budget having taken place. And so the winter fuel payment, really ideally, the government, I think, would have communicated that as part of a wider package of what it's doing in the economy, where it's maybe taking away and where it's maybe giving. With the winter fuel payment, I guess their justification was they needed to get that out there early. They couldn't take these payments away from people in October.
Right.
At that time, that would be wrong. That would be even more difficult. So I think they decided to use it to signal early on that there are going to be tough choices. So I think kind of have to understand that we still don't have a budget. And so a lot of questions are unanswered that I think next month will actually probably be more revealing in terms of where things are going in the coming months.
Jonathan, what was the vibe like at the conference? Was it upbeat, positive? Was it, my gosh, the thrill of victory, but we've got to now produce? What was it like?
I think it was a bit more of the latter. You know, a lot of people thought going into conference that it would be very celebratory. There'd be lots of champagne corks being popped. I mean, this was the first Labour Party conference in 15 years that Labour's convened when in government. And Keir Starmer is the first Prime Minister to address conference in 15 years. But I think, you know, our impression from Sunday going into Monday was that it was actually a lot more somber and beset by a lot of gravitas and realizing, you know, we've inherited something that's quite difficult to solve. There was a bit of a lift in the mood yesterday afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, when the Prime Minister spoke.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a difficult speech for him to have to give, as Kathryn was saying, a month before the budget. So, you know, it was criticized in part for being a bit policy light. But in that respect, it had to be a little bit policy light because you can't preempt the budget. But he's not a natural set piece speaker by any stretch of the imagination. But I think it was probably one of his better speeches. And it hit the target market, which was obviously the Labour members in the hall and the broader Labour ecosystem. And I think it sort of enabled Labour to end on a higher note than what it started.
I changed the Labour Party to restore it to the service of working people. And that is exactly what we will do for Britain. But I will not do it with easy answers. I will not do it with false hope. Not now, not ever. That's how we got here in the first place.
Here in the United States, we have an election coming up on many different levels. It's funny you said, Jonathan, you said that, you know, we have elections much more often. We both love and hate elections. They happen all the time. Can't get enough of it. I think some of the most popular people in the country now are the pollsters who take all the heat if the numbers aren't what the reader wants to see, right? What do you think the viewpoint is from Great Britain? And how vested would Great Britain feel in winners and losers?
Yeah, I think that has been front of mind and I think did come up a lot in the last few days. And I think everyone recognises how close it is. But that actually, I guess, with a recently elected Prime Minister and then your elections coming up, these two leaders are going to be partners for the next, 4 or 5 years in facing the challenges globally that we face currently. Labour ministers and Keir Starmer himself, they were all towing a very strict line on, either way, where the important thing is to engage. I think there obviously are questions and concerns around NATO and the future for NATO. And I think that's probably the first kind of question that will fall following the US elections. But I think everyone is looking forward to seeing what happens and also just having that sort of partnership for the next few years. Definitely there was a big play this week on, Britain is back in the international space and that we recognise that actually with everything going on geopolitically, we do need to play a positive and a proactive role in the coming years.
Jonathan, same question.
Yeah, I think from a broad British point of view, I think the people are, like many in the world, captivated by the American election. I mean, I think many people regard it as the greatest political show on earth, and the British media have quite a few segments on what the latest polling has to say. Yeah. The last presidential debate was carried extensively in British news. So I think people generally, members of the public outside the political bubble, tend to follow it and have a good sort of understanding. But I think the British hold a great store in the special relationship between the two countries. And I think there's a feeling that regardless of who comes through on November the 5th, whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, that relationship will continue. It obviously will be different depending on who the president of the United States is. Mm-hmm. And I would agree with Kathryn. I think the only big question mark really relates to the challenges of global security and particularly the current war in Ukraine and sort of what the difference in policy from the two candidates is in that respect. I think that's probably the biggest anxiety that people across both sides of the political aisle probably face at this stage.
Oh, yeah. We live in anxiety 24/7 right now. And an election, as you can appreciate, has changed dramatically many times over a very short period of time. In 12 weeks, we had like 8 major cataclysmic political events, any one of which could have determined a winner versus a loser. Now, it all seems to be blending into itself. I want to thank you both for joining us from Great Britain today. I want to confess something. I am a Queen's Park Rangers football fan. I know that saying, oh my God, Queen's Park Rangers, what's wrong with you? Arsenal, Man City. No, Queen's Park Rangers. We really appreciate your analysis. We're pleased that the people in Great Britain have a chance actually to push a reset button and see where that takes them. But I think all three of us would admit we're kind of sobered by the fact that the clock is ticking, fairly or not, on that change. And the coming weeks and months and years will bear that out.
Great.
Fantastic.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Be good.